just been a lifelong fan of the business, and you've been to so many different venues. And for me, knowing all this stuff that you've been to, it's been unbelievable. What was some of the amazing moments, especially in the early days of you going to shows? That
I went to the biggest show I ever went to was Bruno versus Pedro at Shea Stadium, and a lot of guys were on that one. That match went like an hour and a half. I wasn't too thrilled with because they didn't get mad at each other. They started a brawl because previously because of the thing with Tanaka and Fuji.
Yeah.
Threw salt in their eyes, that old routine. And they had their match and went to an hour and a half, 11 o'clock curfew draw.
And you never stopped being a fan ever since, that's when...
you go through periods where you get bored with it. But when I started going to the little arenas, went to Sunnyside Gardens and Ridgewood Grove, which were places in the 50s where the live TV used to come from. Saw a bunch of matches. And I think I told you the story once before. The first time I went to Sunnyside was around St. Patrick's Day, and there was a match.
Yes, I've been wanting this story for a long time.
There was a match between two rookies, a guy by the name of Kevin Sullivan and Davey O'Hannon. Two Irish guys were fighting each other, and they're beating each other up in the corner. And all of a sudden, some old drunk the size of your grandfather came out of the crowd and smashed one of them in the back of the head. And I think it was O'Hannon turned around and punched the guy right between the eyes, busted his glasses, and laid him out. And I thought the guy was dead, but he was alive. And then the security came over and dragged the guy by the shirt out of the ring and threw him out in the street. So that was the highlight. That is
not. Now you talk about these little arenas. Now Ridgewood Grove is something that I really want to touch on because you talk about a lot of great memories you've had there, as a fan and whatnot. Now what was the type of venue? It was
a dump. It was. But what happened was it had been open in the 50s and the 60s for wrestling and boxing for TV, like I said.
Yeah.
And then they closed it down, and then late 70s, early 80s, I guess they reopened it as a pool hall and boxing training, and WWF at the time did shows there, and believe it or not, the promoters was a guy named Lou Duva, he managed all the boxers in the 70s and 80s. He was involved in a lot of that. So it was good. He's take your uncle and stuff and your nieces when.
Not my nieces.
My nieces.
My aunts.
Yeah, my sister-in-laws to the matches there, and they got to shake hands with Andre the Giant and stuff like that.
Uncle Jimmy shook Andre's hand, right?
Yep.
And Greg always told me I think it came full circle for Greg, who my other brother, by the way, the unspoken of brother, who actually talked about how when he shook Big Show's hand, I guess it comes full circle. He said it was ginormous.
Yeah, Andre was unbelievable. We were there, and Tito Santana was there all the time, and The Rock's father, Rocky Johnson, was there, and the Samoans, who is the father of the one Samoan is the father of the guy from the Shield now.
Oh, Roman Reigns.
Yeah, he's the Sika. He was there.
Oof.
And one of the cool things we saw there, Sika was wrestling, and they used to shoot loogies at those times. And I don't know if it was Sika or one of the other guys, but they shot a loogie up, and it hit the ring microphone, and it just ripped right off of it. It was incredible. And, yep.
Did it hit Finkel?
No,
was Finkel
wasn't there, though. He didn't do those shows.
Who was it? Was it Capetta? Did Capetta do those?
No, none of those. There was nobody famous.
Oh, okay.
Doing the ring announcement. But a couple of the things that we saw there, we actually saw Pat Patterson wrestle. He didn't have bleach blonde hair at that time. Because he was only training. He was just retired. Yeah. And he wrestled Steve Lombardi, who went on to be the Brooklyn Brawler. And stuff like that. And it was like one of his first matches, and we were sitting in like the first or second row, and he was calling the moves to Lombardi. And the other thing we saw in that one, this was hysterical. The Iron Sheik was there before he was the champ.
Yeah.
And people hated him to pieces. And there was this old lady, and you used to hear about Hatpin Mary at the old Madison Square Garden. This lady was like 80 years old.
Yeah.
And she's cursing at the top of her lungs, and it was hysterical. She was just looking at her. It was amazing he didn't laugh.
Unbelievable. Like, this is what I love hearing these stories like this. Like, you're telling me these stories, but do you feel like wrestling, needs these days, not necessarily back, but do you think like wrestling fans need to be, more in depth of the show instead of critiquing everything like the way you see now?
Well, that's why I used to like those little shows because, the jobbers in those days, we didn't call everybody a superstar, but there were jobbers. And the cool thing on those shows, they used to wrestle each other and used to see which guys could really work. Like I mentioned Davey O'Hannon before, he was good, and Johnny Rods was another one. And you can see which guys are really terrible.
Oh.
There's a guy named Frankie Williams who was voted by Pro Wrestling Illustrated as the worst wrestler of all times. And then there was other guys with just two big fat pigs, Juan Caruso and Bull Pompetti. They were really awful. And what made them awful was that they were also boring. But S.D. Jones was really good, and another guy who died, one of the first guys to die from steroids, Rick McGraw.
You saw Quick Draw?
Yeah.
Oh,
I saw him a couple times. Saw him also at Franklin K. Lane High School. That was the first place we saw Hulk Hogan wrestle.
Who did Hogan wrestle there?
I think some guy named Mike Masters. It was a prelim match.
Oh, prelim match. Oh.
Yeah, and we also saw their snooker wrestle Mr. Saito there at the high school and stuff. So like I said, I always enjoyed those small shows.
I'm just enthralled. I had no idea you saw Hogan wrestle in Franklin K. Lane.
Yeah. Yep.
Oh, wow.
Your Aunt Rosie was going to high school there at the time, and Franklin K. Lane, by the way, is also where Taz went to high school. He was a couple years ahead of Aunt Rosie.
Well, did you know? Well, Taz, if you are listening, Aunt Rosie wants to know who you are. We'll work on that. But I have to admit, I have seen the old programs that you have gotten from the Garden, a lot of those old shows, and just seeing how it was, just seeing the world's difference. When we went for my first ever show, when you took me to the Garden back in 1993. Right, coincidentally, I saw Snuka, Mr. Superfly Snuka.
That's right, that was a return match for him.
And wrestled Brian Christopher. I'll never forget that. And, I saw the program Light and Day. It just seemed like two different worlds. Mr. McMahon, who you see on TV now, has like those nice programs and whatnot. But back in the day, it was simple. It had every local territory, and everybody seemed like, they respected each other a lot.
It was a buck. Yeah, it was a buck. The other thing that was cool, the old territory days were really good because you didn't get to see everybody.
Did you get anyone's besides local New York? And
what happened was, after I was watching a few years in the late 70s, they started showing on Tuesday nights on the Spanish channel, Championship Wrestling for Florida, with Gordon Soley and Dusty Rhodes, and Eddie Graham was the promoter. And that was like a great show, because what they used to do was, like WWF shows, except for an occasional main event type of thing, it was all jobber matches.
Yeah.
But the one for Florida, they had their jobber matches in the TV studio, but they also had when they did house shows, they would have like one camera sitting up in the balcony, and they would film all the matches, and they'd show you highlights from all the matches. So you'd see Dusty getting busted open stuff, and when he came out with a mask on as the Midnight Rider, he rode a horse into the arena.
Now, we're not too sure Dusty was the Midnight Rider.
Yeah, we're pretty sure.
But, oh my goodness.
And again, you got to see a bunch of guys you never got to see before. Like, I remember there was a guy, the Missouri Mauler, who used to use, he was the original guy using like the axe clothesline. He used to knock guys out with the pack song and stuff like that. And it was also the first time I got to see Harley Race wrestle, and guys like that.
Now you talk about the clothesline. I'm thinking Stan Hansen. Did you see Stan Hansen break Bruno's neck? Were you there at that one?
No, I wasn't at that one. I just saw the film of it.
Oh, you did? Now, the one question I do want to tell you, I know you have those tapes. I have a few of them in my room of the old Madison Square Garden network shows. Mm-hmm. I mean, like local shows like that, like the local live house shows at Madison Square Garden. I know I've seen other footage with Boston Garden. Do you feel like that's also missing nowadays?
No, because I think like the old Madison Square Garden shows, those are like the pay-per-views now. Everything used to happen there. So like the heels would get their big matches at Madison Square Garden before they'd get them anyplace else, and they'd go, they'd have the first match, and then they might, if they were good, they'd have like a Texas death match, and if they were really good, then they'd do a cage match or something like that. So those are fun. I went to, I'm trying to think who I saw Backlund wrestle a bunch of times, and my favorite, I saw him against my all-time favorite at that time was Morocco.
Oh, magnificent Morocco. I feel like that guy doesn't get any credit, especially, you see this Superfly Snuka dive off the cage, but you never, I don't think a lot of people really remember it, maybe exception of Mick Foley documenting it now. Yeah. Saying, but Morocco was the guy who took the splash.
Yeah.
But
Morocco was, at that time, he was a horse. I don't know if he was on steroids or not, but he was, and the thing was, you had to see him in person against somebody good because he carried a lot of matches. I saw him against Backlund in a Texas Death Match. I saw him against Steamboat. And I saw him against Snuka. He was really, really good.
Now you said you saw Backlund. I'm trying to remember if didn't Snuka try the dive off the cage before?
Yeah, he missed.
It was on Backlund, right?
Yep.
Was he a face then, Snuka, or was he?
No, he was a heel. But the fans, it was like sort of like when Stone Cold started to turn.
Yeah.
Because that leap was still. I mean, the other guys do the high flying stuff now, but his was like a really violent leap across the ring, and he was really good.
Now, obviously, we're going to branch into a little bit of you making me. I blame you. Mom blames you for making me a big fan of wrestling and everything. Now, You were around for obviously the local days where English spoken wrestling was on Spanish television and all this stuff. Would you agree with the statement that wrestling was held in smoky bingo halls instead of? You would actually agree with that statement?
Yeah, I mean, they had their Madison Square Gardens, but if you ever look online, there's a thing with all the results from different years for Madison for the WWF, and you'll see high schools, during the week, and then they would do Baltimore, and they would do Washington D.C., and they do the Garden, Boston, because they only had the East Coast territory from like Maine down to like Washington D.C., and that was it. Yeah. So they would do a lot of high school stuff.
Wow. So, yeah. Now you made me into a fan of wrestling, and one thing I remember as a kid we used to play was that old Stratomatic game. I have to ask because obviously now you have Champions of the Galaxy, that dice game that they had with. I interviewed Tom Filsinger a while ago. I don't know if you ever knew that from WrestleCon. Where'd you get that game? I've been meaning to ask you that for years because I know
there was a place. Mom used to work over towards Madison Square Garden. It was like one of these fantasy game places. They had like a lot of Dungeon and Dragon stuff, and I just went in there one day, and there it was. I think they used to advertise in the magazines also, but I saw it in there. And it was like $7 or $8, and you just play roll the dice and you did a tournament, and they ranked the guys, and almost everybody was there from that era.
I think
we
so.
Even had like Abdullah the Butcher. I think was the worst guy.
And even then, it was just he always got disqualified somehow.
He always if he didn't get disqualified, he got pinned. Flair was in it, and I don't know if Phil Hogan was in it, but a lot of those guys were in it.
I just remember playing that game with you as a kid, and just really understanding wrestling and learning every wrestler. And I don't know if I ever told you this, but growing up, did you know I ever told the second grade kid you actually were Intercontinental Champion?
No, I didn't.
Yes, I told everyone in second.
You told everybody you were Canadian too. So
okay, that's a long story. I wanted to feel like I was like Stu or something like that. Stu Hart, one of his offspring. But I told the kids you beat the Ultimate Warrior for the Intercontinental title because and I was on a house show, so that was never televised.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so then they were like, "Your dad's a wrestler, awesome!" And I don't think I ever told you that. And then the infamous Hacksaw Jim Duggan Ho in third grade during Miss Sendell's class. Yeah, I'll never forget. Hey, Dad, ho! But that's why it was a dream for me. But obviously now you are a huge wrestling. You still are a huge wrestling fan. You follow a lot. Now, what do you think about?
I will tell you that though. I can't make it through 3 hours of Raw. It's too boring.
Oh, too boring. Now, how do you feel about the business nowadays, especially from the old school days and everything like that, to where wrestling is now?
I like the territory stuff better. Oh, good. The whole family's here.
Oh, yes. Miss Monica in the house, the lunch lady representing.
And B Shizzle.
Yes. But
as long as he doesn't do the stupid laugh, I'm fine.
All right. All right, but regardless of which, so what do you think about the current day product?
I just like the territories because, to me, it's the same guys every week. How many different times can the Shield wrestle against the same three guys? I mean, they do different combinations and all that crap, but, I just like, because you would look forward to, like WWE used to be, WWF used to be, a guy'd come in and beat up some jobbers, and then he'd beat up somebody who was a little bit better, and then he'd beat up somebody a little bit better, and then he'd beat up the champ's best friend, and then he'd get a title match, a couple title matches, and then he'd go back and fight the champ's best friend, and then he'd be gone. So I used to enjoy that.
That was kind of like, I'm guessing, like in the days where they used Zbyszko to defeat San Martino, I guess, a little bit.
Yeah, but that's what it was. They'd come up, and they'd come in there and they'd beat up Jay Strongbow or Gorilla Monsoon, and they'd get bloodied up, and they'd go and fight Bruno or Backlund or somebody, 2 or 3 matches, and they'd lose, and they'd come back and fight Gorilla again, and Gorilla beat them the next time.
And then that'll be it. But Dad, this has been awesome. This has been completely awesome. Doing this interview with you, I really appreciate it. Happy Father's Day.
Okay.
Now, obviously, there's no social media plugs, and nowhere anyone can find you, right?
I don't want anybody finding me.
Well, Dad, thank you very much. This is probably the most important podcast I've ever done, and happy Father's Day. I love you, and remember that.
Okay, good enough. Thanks.
Can you give me one? Can you just give me one? Oh, come on, please! I need it. There's a reason.
Oh, come on! All right.
That just made my day.
Everybody.
Thanks,
Bye.
Dad.
Hey, John.
Hello, Nick.
So, what are you up to?
Getting ready to record the Nick and Jon Live in New Jersey podcast.
Ooh, sounds fun. That's right, folks. The Nick and Jon Live in New Jersey podcast, exclusively on the HardwayHQ podcasting network. John, where can the lovely people find said podcast?
Multiple ways. iTunes, SoundCloud, and Stitcher via the HardwayHQ.
Ooh, you guys should go there.
Nick and Jon Live in New Jersey, exclusively on HardwayHQ.
I know, I just said that.
I know.
Okay.
The Professional 3.